This is just a little slideshow that I put together just a few minutes ago. I call it science fiction to reality, space travel, just a little bit about it. And we know that the first U.S. rockets were actually confiscated from Nazi Germany after World War II. And when the United States went in after the war and the Soviets went in after the war, the United States secretly disassembled these rockets that the Germans had been using. The Germans had been using them to and putting warheads on them and using them to fire a long distance. And that's how they were able to bomb England, London, for example, from so far away. And they had developed these rockets. Nobody else, other people were trying to develop rockets, but nobody else had been able to perfect them like the German Nazi scientists. So the Americans captured them secretly. When they went in, they didn't mention it to the Soviets. They disassembled them and they secretly transferred them to a testing facility in White Sands, New Mexico, where they began to work and develop these rockets, more with the interest of going up instead of using them to go far distances with warheads. They began to work at trying to go up into space. And the early launches, some of the early launches had bad results when the rocket came down or if it exploded. And so these launches brought objections from the Mexican government, who were really worried about what was going to happen if a rocket accidentally went into Mexico and perhaps caused destruction. So they actually insisted that the United States move their rocket testing facility. And then scientists in the United States, as they were learning about rockets, they realized there were a few things that would be important on where to build a rocket testing facility, where to do the rocket testing. They knew that it needed to be as far south as possible because the closer to the equator it was, the easier it would be to get into orbit. And they also realized they needed to launch east. And so if they needed to launch east, then they needed to be on the farthest south that they could be and the farthest east they could be in the United States, so they could launch over the Atlantic Ocean. And if there was a mishap, debris would just fall into the ocean. So because of that, they established a rocket testing facility at the Banana River Naval Air Station in Titusville, or near it, in 1949. And they began to work and develop and on this V2 rocket, expand the German rocket, improve it. And here is the Banana River Naval Air Station. Now, the first missile launch of a V2 rocket was in 1950. After this, they changed the name of Banana River Air Station to Patrick Air Force Base, which many of you are familiar with Patrick Air Force Base. And they were moving along on their development of rockets when the Soviets suddenly launched the Sputnik and put it into orbit. The Sputnik was a satellite, and it began to orbit the Earth, which was terrifying to Americans to know that the Soviets had something orbiting the Earth. They didn't know the capabilities. Could it also shoot rockets down to the Earth at different parts of the United States? Nobody knew. So they turned this fear emotion into a competitive emotion of we've got to beat the Soviets in the space travel. And so there was even more emphasis placed on space travel at this time, and NASA then was established in 1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Now, this new space race, which had been going on anyway as a part of our race with the Soviets in all different aspects of life, but this new space race actually launched what was known as rocket fever. As pop culture absorbed the shapes and themes of this constantly, rapidly innovating jet and space vehicle development that was headlining the newspapers and newsreels and the television in the 50s. So all of the shapes and themes then were reabsorbed into pop culture, which had embraced space travel back in the 30s and 40s as science fiction. There were Buck Rogers in different science fiction stories and themes, but now space travel was becoming a reality. The Soviets had beat us into space with an orbiting satellite going around us all the time. And so the space race continued, intensified, and pop culture intensified its fascination with the space race. Automobiles grew tail fins. Actually, they had begun, many of the tail fins, little tiny tail fins, were added to car designs even in 49 and 50. But they began to expand and grow as people talked about space travel, jet airplanes. And by 1958, most of the popular cars at least had one edition that featured fins, whether they were extreme or small. These tail fins replicated jets and rockets. Here's an ad for a 1958 Buick Special, and you'll see the little slogan down here under the bumper. It looks and feels like flight on wheels. And you see that you've got a jet in the background of this image of the ad, and they've named it. They've used the name B-58, which was a play. The B-58 stood for Buick 58, and they used this to refer to all of their Buick lines that year. But this also was a play on words because of the B-52 being a very advanced bomber. So you see this ad and the fascination with jet travel. Here's another ad, and they call it the airborne B-58 Buick. They have a picture of the Buick as if it's flying, as if it's a jet or a spacecraft. And then you see, here's an ad that has, they call it Passport to a Silent World, and they're featuring the car with no wheels. But here's a Buick in outer space. And there's a reference here, passport to a silent world, the new sound barrier body by Fisher. And this is a reference to the quietness of the car inside, but they're playing again on this competition, this scientific competition we had, and they're referencing the sound barrier, which was broken by an American in 1947. That was Chuck Yeager, Air Force test pilot, who broke the sound barrier in 1947. And then I think in 53, he flew at what was known as a rocket plane all the way across the United States. So as you can see, the pop culture absorbed space travel, rocket fever, the space race into the design of many of their popular products, such as cars. Even in the kitchen, you would see a mixer would look a little bit like a rocket ship. And a mixer, I don't know if y'all know what it is, but a mixer is something that people use in the kitchen to just stir up ingredients. But just all the everything that was invented, all the products, cosmetics, maybe the lipstick would come in a case that looked like a rocket ship. The space race permeated pop culture, and the fascination with the space race was abound. It encompassed all of American culture, and all of the people in the United States began to be emotionally involved anyway in beating the Russians of the Soviet Union to outer space.